Well, we were already friends in the early 90s when Chris discovered alt country, but it sure gave us the ability and a subject matter that allowed us to stay in contact for decades after we went our separate ways. This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Welcome to the podcast.
All right, what are we talking about today, Mr. Polachek?
This episode, we're going back to the beginning, alt country in the 90s, alternatively known as, I guess, alternative country or roots music, more recently, Americana. But we decided to talk specifically about the 90s. That's when you discovered it, and I was close behind you in terms of falling in love with that kind of stuff. And we happened, I think, geographically to be in the right place at the right time to like that stuff. Although I don't know how you could be geographically in the right time. No, that's kind of stupid.
You know what word I want to say? Because you're
Uh,
listing off all the genres, is cowpunk. That's another one.
there you go. Cowpunk kind of preceded alt country, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think like sort of the surf music and cowpunk, but there were a couple bands. It's one of the things that we'll talk about today is there's certainly that core of Americana, to the extent that it sort of got old. A lot of the bands were copying each other, as is often
Yeah.
the thing they do. I'd go to concerts and there'd be sometimes a relatively unknown band that would open up, and I was usually looking for that unique sound, and especially that unique voice. And too often it just came off. And it wasn't just this, but Jay Farrar and Jeff Tweedy defined a lot of those voices. They are responsible for the No Depression sound, which is another one we didn't put in there.
Yeah, we didn't mention no
Um,
depression. You're right.
this one got me excited, so I'm happy to just shit. I'm
I'm just
happy to
happy to
shit.
shit. Shit on the roof, I think, is what I want
That's what
to
I was just gonna say. It's raining. I'm gonna go shit on the roof.
do.
It's gonna say happy to sit here and talk about it, not
Yeah,
shit here and talk about
it,
it.
it's funny that we haven't actually talked about this topic since, I mean, this is it's not the foundation of our friendship,
No.
because we were friends for years before we kind of started listening to this stuff. But I think it's the foundation for our maintaining the relationship over the decades that we have. And I think it's frankly the foundation for doing this ridiculous podcast because it all started from sending or making mixtapes and sending tapes back and forth. And let's face it, most of the music on those tapes is some version of, and I don't know what the broadest term to use these days is, but I would say Americana. That type of music, whether it's kind of more bluegrass or more country or more kind of cowpunk, whatever it may be. I think Americana probably covers it better than most.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've never really thought about it. You put that on the script, and I was like, huh, is that true? That, the commonality of our musical interests held us together. And I think I'm trying to, it's like, if you ever see those stupid commercials where it's like things like a military, not that they're stupid, it's like a savings and loan or something. And they're like, huh, I wonder what my life would have been like if that hadn't happened. And they dream about what would happen. And like one of them, like the guy's out in the woods, he doesn't have the tent that he bought, and there's a bear over his shoulders. And so I guess you haven't seen them. They're funny. But I just had to go through my head. Like it'd be like you'd put on a Tina Turner song, and I'd be like, that's a stupid fucking song. Let me put on some other song. That's too popular. Here, I'll put on a shitty heavy metal song, and you'll hate that. And our playlist would have lasted about two or three songs, and we've been like, we'll try this another time. So, but I think we started to come together a little bit, and we always sort of had, because I don't know why this is, but we couldn't love, or our favorites couldn't be the same artists. We just always sort of had our favorite
Yeah.
artist, whether it be, and I think in some ways, even we talked about this on the last one, the split of Uncle Tupelo. I really wanted Sunvolt to emerge as the better band, and I think you hopped on to Wilco a little sooner than I did. but this goes all the way back to Seeger and Springsteen. I mean, we'd always have some sort of rivalry within our commonalities, and it held true for Americana, and I guess we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, I think that when we were first roommates, I think junior year.
Yep.
And that's when, and we'd known each other since being freshmen, and we're buddies since then. That's why we became roommates. And we're like, I think, I think I can live with this guy, and we won't kill each other. And we lived in the tiniest room that you could find in the fraternity house. And we spent Fridays, we've talked about it before, we spent Fridays, bringing a pitcher of beer up from the basement and just listening to music for 2 hours before we would go out on fraternity row and look for a party. And we started out with very different tastes in music. We kind of off and on again then were roommates for the next 4, 5, 6 years. But the longer we knew each other, the more I think our musical taste started to converge. So the stuff we listened to walking in the door was very different. And I've always given you the credit for kind of discovering alt country back then, because I remember you playing stuff that I liked, and then me kind of following behind. And then I would, occasionally find somebody that you hadn't heard of yet. And again, geographically speaking, because the No Depression movement basically started in Southern Illinois, St. Louis area, and that's where those bands all played, were the clubs in St. Louis. It really felt to me like, although you were the trailblazer, that we were both kind of getting in on the ground floor of something that other people weren't listening to. And
yeah, and I find it funny that you call me the trailblazer, because I really think what happened is it was a lot easier for me to abandon my first choice in music when we knew each other, which was hair metal.
Well, all right.
Because you always had really good taste, and I know that, and I'm probably going to get the years wrong, but secretly I liked some of the stuff that you listened to. Shoot, who's the band? Damn it, Mrs. Jones.
Oh, Counting Crows.
Yeah, Counting Crows. I don't know if the timing lines up, but they weren't alt country by any stretch, but they certainly, could have merged in there with their sound. I mean, and you were into them way before I was. I didn't like them because you liked them, but I think you influenced the direction I ultimately went. And I think I almost found out some of this stuff by chance, because I was reading.
No
I wasn't
Depression.
reading Downbeat. No, I was reading Downbeat, the magazine, which was more jazzy, and that they had some Americana content, and I didn't buy that on my own. I think you were more into jazz and other stuff, and blues for sure.
Yeah.
So again, it's nice of you to give me credit for maybe being the first one to pick up an Americana album. And I think the one that we first really started getting into was Lyle Lovett.
Yeah.
Like at the same time. And then it went from there, and we can sort of trace the various paths that we went all the way up
Yeah,
to
because
today.
you definitely found Lyle Lovett first and started listening to, and I don't think we've talked about this before, but I don't think it was Lyle Lovett and his large band, which kind of blew him up a little bit in the national consciousness. But I think it was either Pontiac or the one that was just called Lyle Lovett. And I am positive that I had never heard of him until you were playing songs from that. And I think it was Pontiac, but he was just hilarious. And I loved listening to the music, and we both dove into that immediately. And he's more traditional country than he is alt country, but he's just his sensibility and his sense of humor. And I think, frankly, the intelligence with which he wrote made him alternative to country, certainly to like Nashville country at that time.
Yeah, and I think you're right, but it's funny. I swear, like that was one where I thought you maybe mentioned something about him, and I went and got him, so I sort of got to claim it. But I don't know. And I still don't know how I went there, because I think I've described our, just sort of walking through the stacks at Street Side, and I know the Subdudes. I think I maybe read about them as winning some award, I thought, with Downbeat, and I hadn't heard them. Only heard their style described briefly. Bought that album, and that's the one that I feel changed me a lot, because it was a very, very different sound than anything I'd listened to. And I started going down like the Radiators. I think they're called the Radiators or the Radiators. I'm not sure how they're pronounced, but sort of that New Orleans-y sound. I got into some Creole stuff. So as I've said to you many times, like I'm brand loyal. So if I find an artist, I tend to buy all their stuff. And as I was exploring, I would go down into those tunnels and I go all the way down into, I bought some albums where half the lyrics were French because it was all Cajun
Right.
stuff. And I'm like, I like it. Don't understand it, but it's good.
Right, right. Which is tough for a guy like you that's all about the lyrics. You're like,
Right.
I think the lyrics are good. I don't know. Je ne sais quoi. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely, again, from my recollection, you discovered Subdueds. You played them a ton all of a sudden, and I fell in love with that band and really fell in love with New Orleans music in general. It's one of the reasons I ended up spending a lot of years in a row going down to Jazz Fest in New Orleans was because of my love. In fact, the very first time I ever went to Jazz Fest, one of the things I did was outside of the festival itself, the only concert like in a club we went to was to go see Subdueds play, and obviously it was awesome. But I credit you with that because that's another one that I don't think I listened to before you did, and it's not like I took a long time to catch on. And I know
Yeah.
with those two performers, I Love It and Subdueds, chances are you played the first album, but I may have ran right out and bought the new one or whatever, an old one that we didn't know about yet. So between us, we had a pretty good collection that we had to split
Yeah.
up at a certain point. But it is, a lot of what we listen to, I think, at that point, setting those two aside, because I Love It is Texas to the core. Subdueds is absolutely a New Orleans type of band or synthesized all that New Orleans sound. But in the area of St. Louis, when we were there, Uncle Tupelo was playing.
Yeah.
Like they were playing at these tiny little clubs that, one of them, it was like 2 blocks from where we were living. And I never saw them play live ever. And I don't think you did either.
I never saw them either. And I was like there, and I didn't even buy their first album. My now ex-wife did. She bought it
Is that
almost
right?
on the same. Yeah, she bought it. She was much more into more classic rock, and there was something about it that drew her attention. And she listened to it and didn't really love it. And I was like, well, let me listen to it. And I started listening to it. And I do remember, and I don't want to go too far down this path. This happened with my research in grad school too. So when I grew up, my grandparents mostly played, traditional country music. They were
Right.
hardcore, like hee haw fans, all that stuff. I know I've said that. I don't want to repeat. And I hated it. I was just like, oh, friggin' hee haw. And then something appealed to me because they sang Uncle Tupelo did a classic Uncle Tupelo. They did a classic Carter family song, No Depression. And I went and listened to the original of that and just hearing the punkified version of it or, the rockified or whatever you want to call Uncle Tupelo's version compared to that was so intriguing because they distilled or they drew out the harder parts of it or the punkier parts of it while remaining true to the roots of the song, which is I think is why it's called roots music. And that's what I was always then looking for. So that very first album that I didn't even buy, and obviously a huge influence on all this stuff, was always constantly seeking that punk country sound. But it wasn't just because there's other bands that just did a punk version of a song,
Right.
and
It
it
wasn't,
wasn't. Yeah,
yeah, those were covers. It
yeah,
basically is what they felt like. And those bands still exist. But yeah, they were making new music but relying on these really deep roots that were old school country,
yeah,
like you said, Carter family country, not even Johnny Cash country necessarily
right.
beforehand. And then also the punk sensibility coming out of the late 70s and 80s. And they really did. And I always think of them as being first. That's probably not true. But all of these other bands that were also playing in that area, in the St. Louis area when we were growing up, or when we were there in college, was, it's like Bottle Rockets. They did the same thing. They were a little more twangy than Uncle Tupelo, but they were following that script. I feel like Gear Daddies out of Minnesota were doing the same thing. There were all these Midwestern bands that were pulling from more traditional country than the crap that was being played on country AM radio, and taking that punk approach to it. And that's the music that you and I started listening to just nonstop starting really in, what was it, 89, I think, 88, 89, as I was out of college before I went to law school. And then during law school is when you and I were roommates for the longest extended period of time. And that's when we were listening to all of that stuff. And it was just this crazy tree of songs. Like you said, we read in a magazine about some band that Uncle Tupelo liked or toured with, and we'd be like, "Wow, let's listen to them." That was Bottle Rockets, right? I mean, they opened for Uncle Tupelo, and even though we never saw Uncle Tupelo, we'd read about it, and we're like, "Well, hey, let's listen to those guys."
Yeah, and there was I think we gravitated largely toward the Midwest bands.
Yeah.
But there was roughly the same time, maybe a little bit later, a movement out in California. I think it was called the Paisley, like bands like I think it's something Paisley, I don't remember, but bands like Green on Red, which was, and I can't remember his name now. He's still around making music. Even Social Distortion, they were more punk,
Right.
but I mean they did a fantastic version, and I think it's truly not just a cover. It's a new version of Ring of Fire,
Right.
that is totally loyal to Johnny Cash's original version while bringing it up to, the punk era and stuff like that, where you reinterpret and remain loyal to the roots. I said it already twice now, but that's what's always turned me on. What happens is, though, unfortunately, is the further you get away from that original intent, you just get bands trying to copy the sound of the bands that were reinterpreting, and it did start to get watered down. But there's still a lot of really good music in the '90s, especially.
Yeah, for sure. And they would take a different route, kind of thing. So that you had those Texas singer-songwriters like Lyle Lovett and and Alejandro came out of that tradition, I
Yep.
think. But he was more melded to punk. I think he rebelled against the actual country roots, but he couldn't avoid them. Just the way he would sing his songs just felt like, he had he may have been force-fed country when he was a kid, but it was there. So he was a good example of that. Who else am I thinking of from
Well, you get like
Texas?
the Flatlanders. So you got
Right,
Joe Ely,
exactly.
Jimmy Dale Gilmore, and Butch Hancock, all in the same band at one point. I think they produced one album, and I forget the name of it. It's a great album. It's something like More of a Legend Than a Band or something, because the album
Yes.
went
Yeah.
nowhere. And it's like hardcore country, like even with like weird instruments that you wouldn't hear anymore, that warbling voices and all that stuff. And they all went off and did similar but different types of thing. Like Joe Ely, I think, was more of a rock. He's a
Yes.
singer-songwriter for sure, but he could play arena rock. Like I saw him in St. Louis, I think at one of the auditoriums there. He was fantastic, and he had who ended up being John Cougar Mellencamp's guitarist, who was just he's a rock and roll, and he's one of the best guitarists I've ever seen in a concert. And Butch Hancock was a great singer-songwriter with a unique voice. He didn't get as far, but I think he probably had a lot of his songs re-recorded by others. And then Jimmy Dale Gilmore had that just classic, I already said it, the warbling voice. I mean, his
Yeah.
voice is so unique. And he put out some stuff. And that I think that runs the spectrum of really countryish to more rock. And I think that's what it's all about, is combining different sounds into one.
Yeah, and not doing it in an obvious way or in a way that feels like they're just slapping, stuff together, or you can do that and make it sound almost like you're making fun of the root of the music. But those guys were kind of acolytes of Townes Van Zandt, right? I mean, that
Hmm.
those guys came from that. Steve Earle directly from Townes Van Zandt, who was just a step up or different than the old school country guys, but very similar. We started listening to all that stuff at the same time, but you could tell that all those different bands were also doing the same thing. They were listening to
Yep.
each other as well as the source material. And it just, like I said a little bit ago, I felt like you and I were, I didn't think of it in these terms at the time, but I just felt like we were kind of pioneers. I felt like we were listening to stuff that other people didn't know about. Which kind of circles back to the problem we have in general of not liking music once it becomes popular. And I know we're not
Yeah.
alone in that, but this stayed that way for a long time and then kind of seeped into the consciousness. I think it became a little bit, well, when Uncle Tupelo broke up, Wilco became a band that was not, you can't call them alt country after their first maybe 2 or 3 albums, they became much more of a pop band.
But we
You know,
still find,
go ahead.
we still manage to find some bands. I want to go with one more Texas one, and I'm not going to be, I should look it up, but I'm just going to talk. But bands like Slobberbone, who
Right.
took the even punkier, harder rock side and just enough country to make it Americana. And those bands, even though they're from Texas, and I think geographically we're really close to like the Flatlanders, they were from Denton. But this to show how bad I know Texas geography. They're from Denton. I know that the Flatlanders are from Lubbock. Who knows how close that is, but it's in Texas. So,
So they're all Texas. It's a big state, admittedly, it's a big state.
But that was a very, very different feel coming out of Texas than some of those other bands we already named. And that was the direction that I really enjoyed, was bands like Slobberbone, who went on, I forget some of the follow-up bands, like I forget the guy's name. Who was the lead singer of Slobberbone? Do you remember?
He also had the band The Drams.
Yeah, the Drams. That's what.
And yeah, I can't remember his name. That may be a post facto for next episode, because I should remember it, even as a solo album, I believe.
Brent somebody, actually.
You're right. Brent Best. There you go.
Yes, nice job. Brent
Defeated
Best.
the post facto. Brent Best was, and he's fantastically talented. I don't know that he's done much recently, but that's the problem with it. This stuff just built on, they built on each other, and that's like, that's what pop music does, of course. But it just created more CDs for us to buy. And they weren't necessarily easy to find either, although we were lucky because we lived in University City, which is basically a suburb of St. Louis. It's where Washington University is located, or right next to it. And U City had 2 great record stores. They had the independent store, which was Vintage Vinyl, which was kind of my favorite. And Streetside was corporately owned, but still really felt like a neighborhood store. And it was really good at the staff picks kind of stuff. But yeah, I spent so much money on CDs that probably, well, it would explain all of the poor man's burritos I made and all the fucking ramen noodles that we ate, because we were spending all our money on CDs. But
yeah, those are like 15 a pop easily.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and they got more expensive as time went on until they went away, thankfully. But yeah, they weren't cheap. And we could get, we were excited to spend 7 or 8 on a used one at Vintage Vinyl. And then I can't tell you how many times I'd buy a CD and then sell it back the next week to Vintage Vinyl for like $1. Be
Right.
like, I saved $1.
Woo! That was the fun part of being, roommates back then in an area where we didn't even realize how kind of prolific's not the right word, how much cool new music was happening right around us. We didn't really get it, but it was fun finding out about these bands and trying to find the CDs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and we had the added fortune of a really great place to see shows, even though we didn't see Uncle Tupelo, but Mississippi Nights was one of the coolest venues. And this is more information than anyone wants, but one of my favorite moments, and it typifies Mississippi Nights. So I saw a band called Helix, heavy metal, hair metal. I was waiting for them to come on, go into the bathroom, standing up in the urinal, and not really paying that much attention. I sort of looked down, some guy walked in, and I saw red leather pants, and I saw a microphone in his pocket down on his leg. And I looked over, and it was the fucking lead singer for Helix coming in to take a piss before the show started. So that sort of was Mississippi Nights in a nutshell. It was great sound. There wasn't a lot of seating unless you sat on the sides, and but you could see pretty much from anywhere. And it was a tiny little intimate place. Not tiny, but it was a small intimate place. In a really great place. I think we saw the Smithereens there.
We did.
Again, that's not Americana, nor is Helix. We saw Adrian Belew and the Bears, who's a band that I love, and probably quite a few others. But we were very fortunate both in the music scene and the record scene there.
Well, yeah, and then even closer to us than the riverfront, which is where Mississippi Nights was. There was a restaurant called Cicero's.
Yeah.
And that place it was called Cicero's Basement Bar, and it was there was never a more apt description because you felt like you were in your grandma's basement when you went down there. It was all, the walls were all like stone, or, I mean, it looked like it was going to collapse on you at any point. And it couldn't have held more than 50 people. I don't even think 50, to tell you the truth. But you get all these bands that would go through there, and that's where Uncle Tupelo played, at least in the late '80s. And you'd see the sign, you'd see the flyers up on telephone poles all over U City for all of these bands, Bottle Rockets, whoever it might be that were playing there. Material Issue I saw there. That's not really an alt country band, but we were lucky in that regard too, is that there was this kind of thriving live music scene in St. Louis. It's kind of underground, I think. But I think that's why these bands were able to find an audience, is they had places to play like that.
Indeed. And I mean, it'd be a fun exercise to go and sort of try to retrace, maybe through a playlist, how we went from artist to artist over the years. Because like I said, we went into some pretty interesting places, and one of which I'll talk about when we get to another segment on the show. Tease. That was a tease, Tom. Did you see that?
Very nicely. You're so professional. Well, actually, let's go ahead and go into a segment. I think it's time. One of the segments we've been trying to put in every episode we can is called Unknown Unknowns. Because I love the unknowns. I love the unknowns. Chris and I have been alternating as best we can and trying to recommend an artist that we feel is, I think the term you used last episode was criminally unknown, which I very much like that. I also think it would be a good band name. I have one that falls perfectly within the theme of alt country in the 90s. There's a band from Columbia, Missouri called Starkweathers, and they don't exist anymore. I looked them up on Spotify, the band Starkweathers, who only had, by the way, 2 singles and 1 5-song EP that I could find anyway. They currently have 56 Spotify listeners for that particular band. And it makes sense because, again, I don't think they've made any music in the last 30 plus years. The guy who led the band, though, is a guy named Mike Ireland, who also has a band called Mike Ireland and Holler. And that band was kind of out in the early 2000s. And I think he's still around doing some stuff here and there. He's got just the perfect alt country voice. The band was out of Columbia, Missouri, as I said. They were definitely part of that Southern Illinois, St. Louis area alt country movement, where he clearly was an Uncle Tupelo fan and a Bottle Rockets fan. He was really, really twangy, and he clearly just didn't catch on. But that EP by the Starkweathers it's got 5 songs, and I still go back and listen to those 5 songs every couple months. I listen to them. I've thrown them on playlist that you and I have exchanged, even though I've owned the album since probably 1995, but I still go back to it all the time. I really just think it's a great. It really captures that Southern alt country feel transplanted into the Midwest, and I was always a little surprised that they didn't hit it. But I think to some people, and maybe to you, they do feel a little derivative from all the other bands that were out there doing that stuff. But I think he's got a pretty distinctive voice, and I thought he was a fun songwriter. The thing I'll have you be very careful about is that there's a metal band out of Philadelphia called Starkweather, singular, as opposed to Starkweathers, plural. And by all indications, they're kind of a white nationalist, racist heavy metal band. That is not my recommendation. Please stay away from Starkweather. Please try to find Mike Ireland and Holler or Starkweathers as my unknown.
Is it possible that Starkweathers saw the coming of Starkweather with their song Little White Trash Boy?
That's very possible. That's one of my favorite Starkweathers songs. What's funny is he did a lot of Ireland. A lot of his writing is kind of historically based, and Starkweather, Charles Raymond Starkweather was a serial killer. So it's kind of crazy that they named themselves after. I think Ireland named the band after that guy. I can almost guarantee you that the heavy metal band definitely named themselves after that guy.
Yeah, and I'm stunned that Starkweathers with an S had such a limited catalog of music. I don't know if you've put every single one of their songs on our playlist, but I always assumed they had 3 or 4 albums and whatnot. And I definitely remember Little White Trash Boy. I don't know I knew it was your favorite song, so that was just lucky. But I know you've put it on other on other playlists, and I like that song a lot.
Yeah, I think that song actually showed up on a Bloodshot Records a compilation too. And that's I say it is possible the first time I heard them was on the Bloodshot Records compilation, and that's when I was able. And then somewhere down the line, I think I found them in a used record store, found the CD because again, not one that was just going to be, not necessarily going to be a staff pick for anybody.
It's a really nice pick. I think it definitely aligns with the criminally underappreciated theme that we're going for. I think that can lead us into our next segment, which is our recommendations. And starting with season 5, we're now in season 6. We decided to go with a decade. Season 5 was about the 80s, and this season is about the 90s. And since this is the 6th episode, we are going with choices from the year 1996. What did you go with, Tom?
My recommendation is a 1996 film that was directed by Barry Sonnenfeld called Get Shorty. It's based upon the Elmore Leonard novel. I'm a big Elmore Leonard fan. I think he writes kind of modern noir, I guess, for lack of, I'm not sure that's the best genre to put it in, but he just writes like gangster stuff and detective stuff. And he's got this great way with dialogue. So I love his books. This is probably one of the best film renditions of his novels that I've seen. And I think there are about 5 or 6 movies that have been made from Elmore Leonard books. But this one was starring John Travolta, Rene Russo, Danny DeVito, Gene Hackman, and Travolta plays a gangster named Chili Palmer who goes out to LA from Jersey, I think, for the purpose of tracking down someone who owes the mob money. And he loves movies, and he basically finds himself in a position where he becomes by the end, he's basically a producer. And it's just a really kind of funny, interesting exploration of how the skills that he's learned as a low-level mob guy really translate well to LA and Hollywood. And it's funny, it's well acted. Rene Russo is awesome in it. It is also beautiful. It's a really fun movie, and I think it's a good recommendation from 1996.
I'm not going to agree with. I am going to agree with you as
Fuck
it being a
you.
good recommendation. So I
Right.
stuck with the music theme. I was scanning through. I was just looked through, best music '96, best movies. Quite a few good choices, but one stood out for me on the music list that I had to go with. One, I've written a blog about this band. Two, you didn't like this band hardly at all.
Nope.
And three, it allows me to talk a little bit about what we were saying about alt country and the different threads, the different what is it? I just go down rabbit holes with different bands, always looking sort of for the edge cases. I don't know why. I just don't like the popular. And I think one of the true edge cases is 16 Horsepower. They released an album in 1996 called Sackcloth and Ashes, which lines up perfectly with the feel of the band. If you've not listened to them, the lead singer is David Eugene Edwards. If you can go out and look on YouTube probably and find some videos of his concerts back then, he was just spooky. Not
Yeah.
he's a big good looking guy. He's just got a look to him. Like he could have lived 200 years ago and been just fine, kicking people's ass and holding them to the Bible, because it's very much the music and the music is old time country. They use some instrumentation that isn't often used, giving it that older feel. Sometimes it really kind of I use the word spooky, but it's kind of a spooky feel at times. He's got a booming voice and a really unique voice. He could be a preacher up there on the pulpit, shouting out the words of God. And I think the other thing is, and I'm not a big religious person, but if you go, I do know this just from being a historian, Old Testament God is a God to be feared and to be obeyed. The New Testament God is a God who loves you and wants you to, join him in heaven. 16 horsepower is all about the Old Testament God. Like
Mhm.
there's lyrics, there's I don't know if it's out there anymore, I haven't looked, but when the internet was first starting and I was getting into 16 horsepower, somebody put up a website where it did an analysis of all the Old Testament references in his lyrics. And he's gone on to form, I would argue, an even more religious band called Woven Hand, which is what you do when you pray. And so 16 Horsepower was his first band. They had a pretty decent release of albums. My very favorite song of theirs is not on this album, but this is a really good album. Highlights the style of the band from, hold on, let me pull up some of my favorites. I mean, it starts with I Seen What I Saw, which is one of the spookier songs. They have really upbeat stuff, which I think is the part that I enjoy the most about 16 Horsepower, like Ruthie Lingle, American Wheeze, Redneck Reel is a real upbeat one, good stuff. But if he's also listened to some of the titles, Heel on the Shovel, Prison Shoe Romp, Neck on the New Blade, Heel on the Shovel starts with I'm digging you a shallow grave and I will face your body towards the sun or something like that. It's just it's stuff that I know you love a lot, Tom. So
It's fucking dark, man. And that's just it. I don't love his voice, but I don't hate it.
right.
And as far as musically speaking, I'm usually I'm okay with, traditional instruments and acoustic sounding stuff, but it is so dark and so fire and brimstone. And you nailed it on the head. It's just Old Testament.
Yeah.
And I'm not particularly religious, but if I'm going with the Testament, I'm going with the new one, because the old one is just retribution and fucking kicking people's ass. And it's one of those things where I can listen to a song from 16 Horsepower in a mixtape and it's fine. But if you listen to one of those albums from
Oh
start
yeah.
to finish, you're gonna walk away with your head down and be like, I hope the sun's out because this really sucks.
Yeah, I listened to the whole album today, and it's nice and gloomy here. Because I
Yeah.
wanted to remind myself of the album. I do want to say, and then I'll be done with 16 Horsepower. My favorite song of theirs is called Outlaw. You can't find it anywhere. It's not on any of the streaming services. You can find a YouTube video of it, but it's about a guy who may have stolen a horse. It's a very vague song, and these three marshals come up. They keep asking him what his name was, and for him to give them the horse, and they finally ask a third time what his name was, and he says something like, two were dead before they could draw. That's my name. That's my name. So
Yeah,
even then he's got that.
he's a
He's
dark motherfucker, man.
he is. And like I said, I'd encourage you to check out a video of him singing in concert because he sat down and was still as dynamic as you can imagine because he's just a spooky dude.
Yeah, like you
So
said, it just sounds like he should have been a preacher in the
yep.
1840s or something. He sings like some of Cormac McCarthy's novels read. Like
There you go.
he's like Blood Meridian, which is just a dark, harsh book to read, for example. That's what he sings like, and I like reading those books. But it's hard to just listen to him just harp on all of the retribution he is seeking, I guess.
And I will close with this. So the reason I chose it is I think it's a decent representation of their music. I do like them. I've even said to Tom, I like them, I appreciate them, but I can't listen to them in large chunks.
Yeah.
They are that edge case that I was seeking. They were, the really hard metal, hair metal band that I was always looking for. And they're not always fun to listen to. And they were trailblazers. There were a decent number of bands who tried to do a similar type of thing as them, but those bands are not always easy to, they're easy to appreciate, hard to listen to. That's what I would say they are.
Our next segment is staff picks. Just around the corner from you. So staff picks is where we try to recommend to you something that is either brand new or coming out soon or has just come out recently. Basically trying to do what the record stores used to do and point out some stuff you may not know about that is on its way. My staff pick for this episode is, I think, a pretty popular TV series. So I don't necessarily think that it's something that our listeners won't know about, but I am happy to say that on February 20th, Jack Reacher on Amazon Prime dropped. If our production schedule goes the way it's supposed to, this will be coming out on the 24th. So on the 20th, which I guess is a Friday, the first 3 episodes of season 3 of Jack Reacher are all dropping at the same time. And by the time this episode comes out, I will have watched all 3 of those with my boys. I love that show. It's based upon the series of novels. I've never read any of the novels. I did watch the movies, which are Tom Cruise movies, and I forgot to take down the name of the star of the TV show, but apparently he more clearly or more accurately represents the way that Jack Reacher is written in the books, because he's this monster of a maze giant. He's like I think he's written as being like 6'8" or 6'9". I think the guy who plays him in the series is probably 6'6", 6'7", big, strong guy, really funny, great. They don't carry the same cast of characters from series to series, at least from 1 to 2, primarily because that's the whole idea. He's a loner that just walks the earth and rights wrongs. But they do a really good job, at least the first 2 seasons, of casting people around him. And I really, really liked season 1. Season 2, surprisingly to me, really maintained the level of quality. And I think season 3 may be the last season because Amazon Prime is dissolving or something. They're not doing original stuff anymore. So I'm really hoping this one holds up, because it may be the last of the TV show. That's my recommendation. Not my recommendation. My staff pick is season 3 of Jack Reacher on Amazon Prime.
Well, that's a great pick for a variety of reasons. I agree. Season 1 was awesome. I think I've watched like 2/3 of season 2 and then forgot. For some reason, I never got back to it. So I'm going to go finish that, and then can't wait for season 3. And hopefully somebody picks him up, because it's a really high quality show. That guy he's so perfect as Reacher. I've not read the books either, but I've read enough about the books. And Tom Cruise supposedly was a terrible choice.
Yeah,
He's
although
a
I
great
like
actor.
those movies.
Yeah, I like the movies too.
And he's Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise. He can do an action flick as well
He can
as
do
anybody.
anything. Yeah. My favorite moment, I think it was in season 2, was when the woman's being carjacked and she was sent to the ATM, and he just walks over to the car and just pulls the guy through the window and beats his head against the car. It was just, I don't know why I'm laughing at someone. It's a fake scene, but it was such a great scene. And
Didn't
it
he punch
typifies what a
through
monster. Yeah, he punched through, grabbed the guy, pulled him through the broken window, and then just took him and beat him like a rag dog against the side of the car. And he went and got the kid out of the car and was like, "Go with your mom." It's just because that's the thing, is he's a good guy. I mean, and if someone is a bad dude, you better watch out, because he's gonna kick your ass one way or another.
Yeah, it's a great show. I highly recommend it.
All right, so I don't know enough about what people follow and don't follow, but I just started watching a series that's new to me, called The Recruit. It's a Netflix show, and I got Netflix I can't remember if I got it to watch a football game, but I got it for a month and I've held on to it for 2 months. So been watching as much as I can, which is a good time for me to do this since we're in the middle of a season. And The Recruit is a really entertaining show. It's about a young, very likable, but untrained for the field. He's a lawyer for the CIA. He's a general counsel, and he gets sent out into the field, and he just fucks up left and right. Like but he still persists, and he learns and he succeeds. So it walks this perfect line between an action series and a comedy. And casting is great. I don't know the actor before this show. His name is Noah Centineo. He plays a character named Owen Hendricks. And to me, and I don't know if this has been said anywhere else, but these are my own thoughts, and I don't watch enough TV to really draw any better than these somewhat general characterizations. But to me, it's like a mashup of The Office, because there's all these scenes in the CIA building, and there's these 2 a little more experienced CIA agents who are constantly fucking with him, and then decide they're trying, he's the new guy, so they're going to undermine him. So there's all these office things that go on. There's another guy in there who I think is a fairly famous Canadian actor. He's really funny because he takes all kinds of drugs to stay awake because he's a funny character. So you get all that office fun, like in The Office, and then it's got like a roommates thing going on, whether that be happy endings, which we talked about in a previous one. So this guy lives with two other people. The other male is a gay character who just wants to get married, and thus far is and just broke up with his boyfriend. And then the other character is his ex-girlfriend of all people. And there's obviously this
Hmm.
little sexual tension going on. And so you got that side with sort of the roommates back in the apartment. And then lastly, you got the spy stuff and the drama. And that stuff's good too. There's some good fight scenes, so it's a really nice combination of stuff. There's some, I think, purposeful overacting, but it never crosses that line of being too much of a farce. And it's not like rip-roaringly funny, but it's got a humor to it that's entertaining. So that's my staff pick. Season two, the reason I'm choosing it for my staff pick is season two is coming out, I think, this week, and we're recording the week of January 27th. Season two is coming out. Season one's already on there, and it's streaming on Netflix.
Yeah, that show completely off my radar. I didn't even know when you said The Recruit. Because there was a movie, a film way
Yeah.
back when that I don't think was particularly good. Although I did a good cast, if I'm not mistaken. Al Pacino, I think, was in that movie. But yeah, episode or season two is out. It looks like in its entirety now. It looks like there's 6 episodes out. It looks like that's the whole season.
Okay. I know
Um,
it's based in South Korea. In fact, I read that his new partner is the Canadian actor, who I should look up his name. And it's supposed to be equally funny and equally good, but I haven't
yeah,
seen it. I think it dropped last night, to tell you the truth, because I knew it dropped on a
yeah.
Thursday.
Yeah, and it looks like it is relatively popular, although I hadn't heard of it at all. I'm definitely going to watch it. Here's one kind of weird, just circular thing for us. The creator of this show is the same guy who created the TV series The Rookie with Nathan
Oh,
Fillion.
that
So that's pretty funny, I think.
is funny. I thought you were going to ask me if the lead actor was related to Ralph Macchio, because he's got a little bit of a Ralph Macchio look to him.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture. I see what you're saying. He does look like he
He's
could be
a little
a
more
distant
filled
cousin.
out and like a cousin or something. Not he doesn't look just like him. He's a good actor though. He does a really nice job.
I'm gonna watch it. That brings us to our playlist picks. Every episode, Chris and I each pick a song to add to our third song in season 6 playlist. We each try to pick a song that relates to the theme of the episode. And in this case, we're talking about alt country in the 90s. I dare say this was pretty easy for both of us, at least in terms of having lots of options to choose from. What's your choice?
Yeah, it was very easy. The only thing that was hard was trying to think of just or trying to pick just one.
Yeah.
And then that actually kind of became easier than I thought because I was able to find a song. I don't remember what inspired me to buy this album, but it was another one that was a big influencer in my move away from the garbage I was listening to toward what, some people may say the garbage I listen to now, but the the Americana, and especially Tom and I both, I think, are really drawn to bands where you have two singers who can harmonize well and or sing off of each other well. And one of my early favorites, and sadly they didn't last in the formation that I enjoyed them in so much, was a band called the Silos.
Mhm.
They came out with a self-titled album in 1990. Opening song starts off with, and it's not, it's sort of in your face. It's like Caroline. I can't sing it,
Yeah.
but the two of them just singing and harmonizing that. And it's a nice upbeat song. And then the next one's a little down, but there's multiple favorites on this. But my very favorite, and something I don't quite know how to describe this other than it's a musical experience that almost creates a feeling in my stomach. So the song is I'm Over You, and I'm not looking at lyrics. I can quote my favorite part of the song almost verbatim. I'll probably get parts of it wrong. But it's about a guy that obviously it's a breakup song, but it's a happy breakup song because he's over her. And it's hold on one second. I'm going down Highway 441 with the windows down, a beer in one hand, the radio blasting. my old news I won't recognize. It just, but it's this feel of like you can almost feel the wind blowing through your hair as he's driving away from a bad situation, and it's that getaway song from a bad relationship. And there's others. What's the name of the band? The Lone Bellow has one that I like quite a bit for very similar reasons, where the the pace of the song, the lyrics make you feel like you're in a car driving away, that feeling of freedom from whatever it is you're running from. And this song is as good as they come. I mean, it's a longer song. It repeats "I'm Over You" several times, but somehow it doesn't feel repetitive because of how these two, who were Walter Salas Humera, who has stayed in the band, is sort of the leader of the Silos for years. Now it says like the Silos featuring him. But at this band, this version of the band, it also had Bob Roop, who went on to join Cracker and a bunch of other bands. Those two harmonized, and I never felt like they hit the same level after this. They put out plenty of really good music because Walter Salas Humera is a great songwriter and a great singer, but there was something special about the way these two sang together. So this is my choice for the playlist for season 6, episode 6. "I'm Over You."
Yeah, that's a great band. I didn't realize how big their discography is. Like they've put
Yeah.
out a ton of albums. It looks like 13 or 14 albums. But when I say they, obviously it's not the incarnation of the band that you and I like so much, because I'm with you. I really love that song. I really love that album. Listen to it all the time. I feel like there's kind of a like you said, it's kind of a light feeling to everything they do. There's definitely a Latin influence on the band. I don't know exactly what Salas Humara's background is necessarily. I don't know where he's from or what his nationality is, but there's just a kind of a rhythm. They remind me in that incarnation anyway. It kind of feels like Subdueds, but
Mhm.
not really, but not that
Yep.
Cajun Zydeco feel underneath it. It's a different thing, which I feel like maybe is more of a Latin type of beat or something along those lines.
And I've always made assumptions, but their first album, the one before this, even though this is self-titled, was called Cuba. So I don't know if that's
Uh,
representative or just a theme for that, or just a title for that album. But yeah, that's a really great comparison, and I think that that's why I liked it so much as
yeah.
well, because I was already into the Subdueds. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that. It is Subduedian, but without the Cajun or New Orleans feel, but a different influence, which I liked a lot. So
Yeah, agreed. My pick for the playlist for this episode is from 1994. It is a band I talked about briefly when we were discussing our time in the St. Louis area. The band is the Bottle Rockets. The album is The Brooklyn Side, which is my favorite Bottle Rockets album. They've got, probably 20 albums out there. They're really good. I think they just finally retired the band. I don't think they're performing or recording anymore as Bottle Rockets, but you should listen to all of their music as far as I'm concerned. But probably one of their best songs, at least to me, is the song Welfare Music on the Brooklyn Side. It is just it's kind of a spare song. It's it's not overly it's not overly instrumental. I guess that's a bad way to describe it. I guess it just seems like a very simple, straightforward song. It feels very country, but I also feel, frankly, unfortunately, it feels very relevant to today and society in America today. The final stanza, the final verse of the song reads, "Angry fat man on the radio wants to keep his taxes way down low, says there ought to be a law, angriest man you ever saw." That was true then in 94, and unfortunately, it seems to be just as true now. But it's basically just a song about a woman. Clearly, she's kind of in the South. I picture her in a trailer park somewhere. She's just trying to get by. It captures kind of that desperate feeling, I think, of being in poverty, but trying to find something to smile about or dance to on a Friday or Saturday night. And I can't recommend this song more highly than I do. It's been covered a couple times. I know Todd Snyder covered it, but my choice for the playlist is Welfare Music by the Bottle Rock.
it's really funny how we have this weird synergy with each other especially on these political issues that we've both been down about. But I was just thinking the last couple days about, I was like, there's a song that referenced that fat bastard. Who was it? Rush.
Rush
I
Limbaugh.
think that's referring to Rush.
It is for sure.
And I was like, man, I wonder what song that was. And it wasn't that big of a deal, but I would have never thought to connect it to welfare music. But that's one of my favorite stanzas in a song just in general, because I mean the Bottle Rockets are really good. They wrote some really great music, but that song is a great choice. Nice work.
Third Song In is recorded in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Joliet, Illinois. You can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. We welcome any comments, questions, or suggestions. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcast. Rate and review us and give us all of your stars. Please download the podcast when you can, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music.
You can also check out our website, thirdsonginpodcast.com. You can have links to all of our episodes on there. You can also have a direct link to all the blogs we put up. Tom and I write something that we publish every Thursday. There's also links to all the information that we discussed on the show. So if you click on From Our Shows, you can see our staff picks, recommendations, unknown unknowns, and also our As Mentioned page, which has links to information about the various guests that we're fortunate to have on the show as well.
You can also find us on Facebook if you search Third Song In, and our blog is now on Substack, so please subscribe to us there.
You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. Thanks for listening.
That brings us to our plate. Oh, there we go again. Every fucking time. Chiclets. What is it? It's not chiclets. It's
Skittles.
Skittles. Skittles. We'll just yell Skittles out. Skittles, motherfucker! Skittles! And in our
But I
case,
saw
it just
a
happens
really
over.
funny commercial. Would you stop talking? So a really funny commercial with Marshawn Lynch where he's supposedly the color commentator and some other guy. And like, no, you go, no, you go. And then they both pause and then they both start talking at the same time. And that's what Tom and I do all the fucking time.
In case you hadn't noticed. You realize you fucking Marshawn me on the closing.
I know. I was
in
like,
the middle.
Oh,
I'm like, when have you ever tried to say anything during
I don't
that
know.
part of it? You were like,
I don't know what the fuck was going on.
Marshawn?
Hopefully we got all the Marshawn out of us.